Hi guys, it's Brooke here. I have a super quick favor to ask. When you have a moment, please take just a second to give this podcast a 5-star review. This will help me to continue the podcast and continue to bring these resources to the community. Thank you so much for that 5-star review.
Yeah, it's been great. And I called it hopelessly gifted. And everybody's like, that sounds kind of negative. I'm like, it's really not. It's more like you are who you are. It's hopeless to try to wish you were somebody else. You are exactly who you are. Even if you feel like an alien on this planet, that's okay. And at the same time, a lot of people see giftedness as, oh, you're going to be great. Life's going to be easy. You're so talented. Everything's going to be great for you. And I try to touch base with the parents who are like, this is painful. And I'm worried about my kid and it's feeling hopeless and I don't know how to get the help that I need. And that's who I want to be talking to, because you are not alone. And, it is through the hopelessness, there is a process to finding hope.
All right, so I am so excited about our conversation today. Today we're going to have an excellent guest, Mark Talaga, who's a counselor and speaker and consultant, specializes in supporting gifted and twice exceptional individuals. And through his work with the Center for Identity Potential, Mark helps educators, clinicians, and families better understand how things like cognitive intensity, executive functioning, and processing differences shape both learning and identity. And he's known for taking complex neurodevelopmental concepts and turning them into practical, real-world strategies that actually help people connect and thrive. And I just have no doubt I'm going to learn something from this conversation today. So I'm so excited. And also, Mark is the host of the Hopelessly Gifted podcast, and that offers resources and insight for those navigating the unique experiences of gifted and twice exceptional learners. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. Well, I had such a good time chatting with you before our episode today and just learning a little bit back about your journey. And I'd love to start with having you share with our listeners, just kind of going back to the beginning and kind of a little bit more about your journey.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I never in a million years would have thought that I would end up doing what I'm doing, working with, gifted kids and families and helping support them. Because, I myself grew up as, a gifted kid. I was never really formally, identified in any real way, but yeah, school was never really an issue. I never really studied or took notes. I could just kind of, get by no problem. And then ultimately, as I went on through college, I thought I'd get into music because I played guitar, and I was like, I don't really want to do that. I'll get into video games because that's an area of high level of interest. And so that'll keep me connected to it and I'll do a good job there. And I did that for about 4 years and then eventually got fired. And a big part of the reason was, my executive functioning, my ability to stay organized, my ability to understand that, yes, I was a smart guy, but that didn't always translate into real world skills, basically came, to a head. And it forced me to kind of take a step back and be like, what am I doing here? What do I want to be doing? Which was a good thing. And ultimately I realized somewhere deep down, I really wanted to help people. And so I went into counseling psychology, and, I got connected with this guy, Andy Mahoney, who was one of the founders of actually creating the idea of counseling to the gifted population, like taking that level of extremes into the counseling work. And he mentored under him and been doing this for about 12 years now. And so it's been great. And the more I do the work, the more I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was up against. And I had no idea and, just kind of overcompensated for everything.
Yeah, how cool. I mean, your own, learning through helping others is helping your own personal journey as well. And both, they both kind of probably go back and forth and supporting themselves, but that's fantastic. And at what point in that process did you decide you really wanted to help others?
Yeah, I think it was this kind of, a lot of gifted people out there. And again, that term is, loaded, but, tend to try to gravitate towards, well, I'll just do what I do well. Mm-hmm. Like I'll plan my life around what I'm good at, mm-hmm. rather than who they really are, what they want to express, what's important to them. Mm-hmm. And I definitely fell into that trap. But because I failed in a sense, it was a it gave me an opportunity to be like, okay, maybe it's not doing what I'm good at. Actually, side note, after I got laid off, before I went back into counseling psychology, I was like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll do the most low stress, easiest job in the planet. And that way I'll never be disappointed, kind of a thing. So I worked in junk mail. Like, people would send this company junk mail and I would like code it into a database. The most mindless job. It was fine. It was a good job. I'm glad I had it, but bored to tears. And so I'm like, okay, well, it's not about the stress or the demand. It's something else. And that's when I got more connected to, what do I really want to do in this world? What would be something that speaks to me? And helping others was on that list.
Amazing. Well, I think what's so significant about that, and it makes me think of, our focus and the programs that I do, is just, it's about quality of life. And, you can do a low stress job, but that's not a high quality of life if you're not doing things meaningfully and contributing. And so I think that is so great that you didn't give up and you just kept figuring it out until you landed where you are and have such a high impact. So it's amazing. And, I think it would be good to talk about, what you had shared with me before. There were some vulnerabilities in your profile, and I know that's probably so relatable to the clients you serve and those that have the gifted profile. What would you say those vulnerabilities were?
Absolutely. And, I want to highlight that there's a reason I use the term vulnerabilities and not weaknesses, because typically when you're dealing with a gifted child, it's really anybody. These are all issues that are rooted in development. And when something is underdeveloped, it doesn't mean it can't get better, it can't get stronger. But because gifted people grow up, or 2E people grow up so asynchronous, meaning their development in one area is really, really high, or they're really, really intelligent in certain areas or whatever, and then other areas are just way behind, that gap is how we would call it, a vulnerability. So my vulnerability, in a sense, was my executive functioning, staying organized, prioritizing, planning, emotional regulation, all that fun stuff. And then some processing issues, where a lot of gifted people will think they're hearing everything from another person, or like a list of instructions or details. But what they're really doing is they're alerting to the gist of what they're hearing and then filling the rest in with their smarts by assuming they, know what they heard. And so that got me in trouble quite a bit, where I'd be like, oh yeah, I got you. And I'm moving so fast that I'm not slowing myself down. Do I really hear what they need from me, or what's expected, and so on and so forth. So things like that really impacted, my work life, certainly, but relationships as well in other areas.
Yeah, that's such a good explanation. And I want to make sure we talk about kind of what this profile looks like for individuals. And, I think we've come so far in the field. I was thinking about the founder of RDI, which is a therapy that I do, and he was considered gifted, but he's, came from a generation where they put him in a really low and special needs class at that time. And he tells his journey, openly about it. He talks about it quite a bit. Fascinating journey, and how, led him to where he is today. But I'd love for you to share just a little bit about kind of what that profile looks like for people that haven't heard of twice exceptional. There's all these terms, and, what does it look like? Because it is like you said, it can be a mismatch of skill levels, and it can be hard to support. So,
well, right. And it looks so many different ways to so many different people. So it's kind of like you got to start with the baseline of, what giftedness means, at least in the way I use it in my work, is it's just some area of a child's development that's in an extreme, that is outside of the norm, that is accelerated. And again, that could be their physical, gross and fine motor skills. That can be an artistic giftedness. It can be a gifted sense of moral justice, of right and wrong, of emotional intensity, anything that just feels in the extreme area of normal human development, meaning we're all still humans, qualifies under my book. It's not a number. It's not a test. It's not a how well you do in school kind of a thing. And so when we get to the term twice exceptional, that was created because it was, this person is gifted. They have extremes in ability somewhere, and also have a learning diagnosis or a learning disorder, right? ADHD, OCD, and really anything. And so they're like, you're twice exceptional. Now, the reality is people are so much more complicated than that. So I don't even like the term 2E, because it's usually more like 10E. right? You got processing issues, you've got expressive language issues, you've got auditory processing issues, possibly, you've got anxiety, you got this, you got that. So it's like, it's a real hodgepodge of development. And so there's a term that we use called asynchronous development, meaning not everything in a person always develops at the same rate of speed or together. And when you look at a lot of these kids, yeah, you have areas of extreme ability and then areas of relative normal ability or areas of delay. And those big gaps are really what cause the lion's share of a child's issues, or even, or an adult's issues as well.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. The way you just explained it, that was super helpful. And I had not really processed the term, what twice exceptional was supposed to mean. So I'm glad you clarified that, because that was helpful.
Yeah, it's used in a way like, but the problem is it separates people of like, oh, you're 2E and then you're gifted, and like gifted, like, oh, you're all good, you're all set. I've never found that to be true. I'm sure it exists. I'm sure there's some people out there that are, genetic freaks of nature that have no problems and are accelerating in life. That's great. Good for them. But I really, it's like, if you're gifted, you're 2E, or meaning if you're gifted, you're asynchronous. And it's there. Whether it causes a problem or not is probably more of what would bring you into my office, but it's almost always there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you talked about anxiety being really common with this kind of population, and certainly with the population I serve with autism, high levels of anxiety, which makes perfect sense as to why that's happening. But I want to kind of flesh that out a little bit more and talk about why that is a common thread for the population you serve.
Absolutely. And so, on one level, it's just, if you look at asynchronous development, you have areas all over the place. That in and of itself just creates a low level anxiety. I have gaps in my profile. I have a general sense of anxiety around situations that I'm in, or foreseeing I'm going to be in, or as I'm reliving my past and can feel it towards that, So I like to, for parents, I try to break down anxiety typically is a lack of skills somewhere, a lack of an ability to deal with something, right? If you have social anxiety, it's not that you don't like people. It's probably actually that you really want to connect with people, but you don't know how to do it in a way where you're not compromising yourself, or you're not even sure, like, where do I put my drink if I'm at a party? Like little things of what it takes to really feel like you're doing it well. And if you've developed a skill, that's where confidence comes from. It's where the idea of, I feel good about it because I know how to do something. So whenever I'm dealing with anxiety, I'm starting with, okay, we got gaps somewhere. And then I'm looking at where is their vulnerability? Where is their underdevelopment? What is it that they're trying to do, but it's not as successful as they might want it to be, and whether that's school or home life or relationships or whatever.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love that you're focusing on that, the competency, that really builds that confidence to go towards opportunities and to try new things, and, to be ready, and identity too. I think it's fantastic. I want to talk about identity that you work on. I think I'm such a big proponent of that, and helping clients see themselves as a positive person that can handle life, right? It's dynamic and messy and, unpredictable. And so, those are big factors in the work that I do. And I'm so grateful that you share that you do that too. And I want to have you share a little bit more about why you do that, and, what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, identities, is in the purest form just a tool of expression. We all have multitudes of identities, right? I'm not just a podcast host or a counselor or a father or whatever. Like, those are all separate identities, pieces that are part of me that I express into the world. But those identities also have to fit me, right? The way that I'm a dad is not necessarily how everybody else in the world is going to be a dad. It's got to be the way that this is how I want to be a dad. And sometimes there's challenges in that. If I'm not feeling like I have enough energy for my kids, and I'm the tired dad all the time, and that's not really who I want to be or how I want to express myself, that's an identity disturbance. That's an area where I would have to really look at that identity and what is helping me build that or not, right? So our belief at the center is that, identity disturbances are the root really of all the etymology or the exacerbation of all negative health, right? Like, I mean, it sounds a little intense, but the truth of the matter is, if you're living in a way that is not who you really are for a long period of time, that will activate a lot of sickness in you, whether that's mental health issues or genetic predisposition to negative side effects. It's in there. It can make things worse, right? We have certain genetic things that we're just born with. If you have diabetes or whatever, that's not really identity based. But if you're, so let's bring it to a gifted person. Gifted kids have this identity that they're smart, they're capable, that they can do anything, or a person, or maybe the opposite. I have such a negative view of myself that I'm limiting myself all the time. I'm not able to do this. I'm not able to do that. And so is that identity really you? Is it really expressing you? For some gifted kids, because they struggle so much and they need so much support, this identity being smart and capable isn't a good fit. They need to be like, I'm a gifted learner. I'm capable in a lot of areas and under certain contexts, but I'm also in need of support. And when I have that all together, I can feel activated. I can create things. I can get motivated to do things. And so we're always trying to help people build identities that are really in line with who they are as people. But they got to really know themselves. They got to really be honest about who they really are. And the same thing with people who limit themselves. I'm never going to limit you. If you want to, you're socially anxious, but you want to be a motivational speaker, I'll be like, great. But now let's look at the reality of what that's going to mean for you as a unique person and how you want to bring yourself into that role and that identity.
Yeah. Yeah. Incredible. It makes so much sense. And I'm so curious, and as you mentioned that, they have to have that sense of self and awareness, which is, a big area, especially for my work with autistic individuals, is helping them have a sense of self and a relationship with self. And sometimes we find that's the starting point, because then you can have a relationship with others. And I'm so curious how you support that. What you just described, it was beautiful. So can you share just a little bit about, I'm just dying to know, how does that work in practice?
Yeah, for sure. So, we have a model that we use here at the center. It's called the FIT model. It was developed by Andy Mahoney, the guy I mentioned earlier. And the idea is, when we're building any identity, you have to take a look at every single system that plays a part in that person's life as it relates to the identities. So your self system, your family system, your educational system, your psychological system, your physiological system, your religious system, on and on and on and on, right? All of that has an impact. And then when we look across those systems, we're looking at, does that system validate or invalidate this identity? Does it affirm, support, help challenge, or not? Do you affiliate within that system in relation to this identity? And does it meet your purpose, your affinity in life? And so we have a very kind of complicated yet organized way to really help a person explore where that identity is being met and not, and where they might need to translate that into action or not, right? And so a lot of people, you start with the self system. Do you validate this identity that you're trying to create? You want to be a piano player. Do you validate that in self? Do you believe somewhere deep down that you have the stamp of approval that you are a piano player, whether you can do it or not? And you can start there. Or do you affirm it? Do you work on this? Do you challenge yourself? Do you grow in this identity, or do you not? And do you connect with others, and so on and so on? So there's a systematic way we tend to go through the idea of how we help people become aware and understand all the complicated mess that plays a part and what it means to grow.
Yeah, you just made me think of an interesting memory I went through, and that resonated as you were sharing that. And I was in this health program a couple of years ago and trying to get stronger, lose weight. And they did a presentation on, part of the program was these online courses, and they did a presentation on identifying as somebody that is fit and identifying as somebody that is healthy and that is strong and all the things. And it was fascinating because I started to then have dreams about being that person.
Look at that. There you go. That's potential right there.
I know. I was like, oh, I get it. I really have to identify as a person, not a person that struggles, but a person that is fit and healthy and can achieve this goal. And then it just kind of took off from there. And it was so interesting how the brain works and how that whole process works, and how it can really have an impact on the changes.
It's funny because, we teach a lot of these kids that the brain can't process a negative, meaning if I say, don't think of an elephant, like good luck. You have to in order to try to accomplish that. And so, when we're building identities, a lot of gifted kids are good at like poking holes and stuff and thinking what's not going to work because they're very analytical and they can kind of shoot themselves into the future and be like, well, here's where it's going to fall apart. And so it's hard to say, no, you're building what you are, not what you don't want. Like, what are you creating that is in line with you? And so that's a perfect example of, I'm not trying to stop doing things. I'm not trying to avoid a certain aspect of my life. I'm trying to build what fitness or health or whatever it is and activate myself that way. That's important.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, it makes sense. And then that, I feel like then that leads to the choices that you make.
Yeah.
Because you see yourself.
But you need a framework.
Mm-hmm.
You need a framework and you need to feel valid. Like, yeah. And again, we get to define what that looks like for us. My version of fit and healthy is different from your version of fit and healthy. And that's exactly what it should be, because it's our definition of this is what it wants, what I want it to be for me. And then, yes, so for some gifted people, we need to, or anybody really, this is a human issue of how we manage expectations. And we're not looking for ideal or perfect. We're just looking for what would help us feel more like ourselves, really.
Yeah, and that's such an important part, because the perfection piece can also be a factor to work on. And being, kind to yourself and accepting of, that we all make mistakes and that we have to keep just going forward and learn from them. And it's a tricky process to navigate, but can be very
100%. That's why we got people like you and me out there. Yeah. It's not easy. It's hard.
Yes. Yes. And everybody needs feedback. We all benefit from it.
100%.
So, yes. Well, let's go through the assessment process and your evaluation process. What does that look like?
This show is brought to you by Therapeutic Approach to Growth. Therapeutic Approach to Growth helps families with relationship and behavioral needs. Their holistic programs are individualized to honor and respect each family and their autistic son or daughter's sense of self through programs such as relationship development intervention, naturalistic ABA, and animal-assisted services. If you're finding yourself frustrated or discouraged with your current behavioral programs and would like to see more long-term meaningful growth for you and your family, then contact TAG today at www.tagforgrowth, that's TAGFORGROWTH.com, to learn more about how to schedule a consultation or how they can offer you the help your family needs, whether in person, remotely, or in a school setting. Again, that's www.tagforgrowth.com.
Right. So, our assessment and evaluation starts the second you call our center, where we're getting a sense of what is it that you need. And not everybody knows what they need. They're coming in with maybe fear or just pain or worry. And our job is to say, okay, what's, really driving that and where's the support really need to lie? And as we're meeting through consultation and, possibly setting up appointments to meet with the child and individual, we're still evaluating what's really connected here. Where are all these systems playing a part? And a lot of times in our work, we'll start to realize that the kid themselves is okay. They're like, now that we're looking at it, you're doing all right. Like for where you are developmentally, like we don't need to put you any other way, but maybe the family or the parents actually are the ones that need more support on how to manage what they're struggling with at home. And so we'll make a recommendation. What really would be more helpful here is how we bring you into the process, because almost everything is a system, right? It's very rare that it's just the kid that is operating in a vacuum that needs help by themselves. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't really work that way. And so we're evaluating, yes, where the need is. And then if the cases are particularly complicated, and a lot of these ones are that come to our practice, we'll make the call to say this might be an appropriate case for neuropsychological testing. We want to know as much as we possibly can about how this kid interacts with the world, how they process everything, what their working memory is looking like, what particular sub-test do we need to know to see where their math seems to be creating a challenge for them, whatever it is. But the idea is when we have an enormous amount of information, we can then integrate that into the therapy process so that we're helping the child realize, these gaps, this asynchronous development is impacting you maybe even more than you think. And it's causing a lot of what you're perceiving as the issue of anxiety or perfectionism or sleep issues, which are more symptoms at the end of the day that aren't being dealt with because the kid's just trying to, burn the candle at both ends for, 6 hours a day, every day. And it has a cost.
Yeah, I think that's such a key factor that a lot of times we see these challenges and really they were the result of something else that is so taxing that it's going to lead to anxiety behaviors, whatever it may be. And, if you can address the core issue, then you start to see those things dissipate, or lessen at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quite a bit. And another term you use, which I use quite a bit too, and I'm curious to hear your version of it, is scaffolding. What does that look like in your practice when you're thinking about scaffolding for your clients?
Right. So the idea is, yes, we're meeting a client where they are at. Where are they actually able to do something? Because at least in my population and really everywhere, kids have a tendency to want to give off more expertise than they might have, especially if their identity is wrapped up in being smart and capable. And so, when we're scaffolding, a lot of times it sounds kind of crazy to the parents where, I'm having that, like, I'll give you an example. We had I think it was like a 15, 16-year-old kid, and the dad was just livid because the kid would not do the one task that he had to do every week, which was take the garbage out. And so the dad's like, he's just lazy, he doesn't want to do it. And I'm like, I'm going to challenge you just a second and say, it's not that he won't, it's that he can't. And the dad's like, of course he can. He's 15, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, but let's break down every single step that has to go into remembering and then executing and initiating on it. And I kind of went down this big list to purposely overload him a little bit. See, there's more to it than you think. And so what we have to challenge is this idea that it's not that they won't, but that they can't, because developmentally there's a challenge there. And so what I told that dad to do was every time it's garbage day, you will walk down with your son and then take it back. And week after week after week. And then by week 4 or 5, that dad went up to go tell his son, okay, it's time to go. And the kid already did it. Because now all of a sudden you have scaffolded for the appropriate developmental challenge, which was, yes, all executive function based, but still needed that, even though it feels like it shouldn't need that, right? Or, my kid shouldn't need reading help. They read 20 books a day. Yeah, but they're all fantasy, sci-fi, fiction that's very interest driven. And yet when they have to read something more critical at school, they come apart or they avoid or they're skipping things. And so we have to look at that as you might have to scaffold their reading, even though it seems like a crazy thing to do because they're a voracious reader, right? So scaffolding is very peeling back the curtain and saying there may be more challenge in why a kid won't do something than you think. And let's meet them where they are.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's so resonates with my philosophy. And I always like to think of that quote that's, I be missaying it, but it's people will do well if they can, and so it's not that they're choosing to not do well, it's that they can't. And so if you can help them be successful, then they will. And we all want to be successful inherently, right? We don't want to not feel competent.
Exactly. It reminds me of the quote. I think it's kind of in the same line. If the idea is if they try harder, they'll do better. And it's really the opposite. If they do better, they'll try harder. So you have to help them learn to do better at the thing first with more support, more help. And a lot of parents are like, yeah, but if I'm remembering all their assignments for them and I'm packing their bag and I'm doing all this, that's doing them a disservice. Not necessarily. If developmentally they can't, and you're teaching them how to receive help and support, and then ultimately you start scaffolding up for how they're going to do it a little bit at a time, or how you're going to integrate their help and do it, or give them some responsibility in it, that's not going to damage them. I promise you.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's all about that mindful approach of, being able to transfer that responsibility over when they're capable. And I think that's, the gift that you're giving parents is, being able to learn that so they can then be in that mindful role as a parent and effectively guide their child. it's a careful process. It's not a perfect process.
But it's a process, and it always needs to be reevaluated. Is the process working? Is there holes in it? Are we running into challenges? So let's go back and look at the process. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, this isn't working. You know what your process is of intentional growth and development, but where are the challenges, and where might you need some help as a family or a parent, where you might need an expert eye on it or whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I imagine that this population, it's even more tricky because they have such high level of skills in areas. So it feels like they should be able to do all these things. And it can be confusing why the executive functioning can be so challenging.
Super challenging. And to be honest, there's a lot of ego in it. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't mean it as a bad thing, like a little ego, it's great. It'll help you a lot. You'll feel, you can go far in life. But sometimes these kids or even the parents have so much ego. I know what it is. I know what the problem is. I know what I need to do. And it's not, but like nothing changes because they won't let go of this idea that there's a struggle or there's pain or they're not sure or they feel helpless or powerless. And sometimes it's very hard to gently push that ego aside and say, hey, you might need more than you think.
Definitely. I know that's such a good point. And I'd love for you to share if you have a moment or example where you had a client that had a really big breakthrough, kind of what that looks like with your population.
Oh boy, I got a lot. I had one recently. I mean, the other day I had a client who I'd worked with for a very long time who, really struggled to express themselves. There was like a language, an expressive language gap in his vulnerability. And so a lot of the work we did was how he started to identify and express the things he was picking up on, because he was a hyper observant kid. I mean, this kid picked up on everything, but he never really did anything with it. And so he kind of relegated himself to this role where he was just always in the background and, never would put himself out there or expose himself. He's a very guarded guy. And then just the other day, he's coming in and he's telling me how he's really thought about how that's affected his relationships and who he chooses to hang out with. And he was like, I'm trying to really figure out how to, find the people that'll give me what I need. And I said, bud, you're focused too much on yourself. You've got to find out how you give from yourself to others, and you will create and draw on what you need in this life. And he started to have this breakthrough of, he realized that somewhere deep down, every career he was choosing for himself was focused on what he could do well, rather than what he wanted to contribute to the world and how much he wanted to help people. Like that was like an aha moment. Like that part of him was very deep down and deep seated, but he was starting to express it more and more. And he's starting to like navigate college in a different way, where what if I went into a profession where I learned how to help people really, really well? And there was there's a lightness in him and a freedom. And even his mom texted me afterwards. She goes, I don't know what you said to him, but he is talking about school in a different way. He's feeling lighter. And again, this is not every single session with me, but it was one of those moments where it was a lot of hard work, a lot of process, a lot of development of awareness in this kid for this one moment of, he saw finally a light of, I get to choose how I want to be in this world. And it just meant the world to me.
Yeah, that's huge. And I mean, that changes somebody's path, right? It's a completely different viewpoint, framework to be working from, and so meaningful. I love that. It's really, really important work you're doing, helping people in that way. And I think it's, one of the things that I'm so curious about are schools, because, I have a client that fits this profile, and I'm looking for schools, and it's hard to find schools that are the right fit, that are public schools. There are plenty that are very expensive to attend, but to find public schools. So what do you think schools are often missing, and what would you share, for those that are working in schools?
That is one of the biggest issues that comes up in our practices. Where do we have a place that can meet the needs of our kids, right? And the kids are so unique because, again, they do need challenge and rigor and academic, challenge to them. And at the same time, enormous amounts of support in ways that aren't very visible. And obviously not a lot of schools are going to just get that inherently. Sometimes you'll get a teacher that comes in your life that just nails this kid and is super helpful. But your job in that process is, what are the child's needs that are the priority, because it's different with each kid and at different ages. Sometimes the priority is academic challenge. Sometimes the priority is behavioral support, right? or just kind of freedom, or we're just working on how they sit in a classroom. That might be the most important thing that child needs right now. And parents are like, well, they won't be learning. I'm like, doesn't matter. If we can't deal with where they're at developmentally here, the learning part is going to be a challenge forever. And so that priority is really tricky. And there's a lot of private schools out there that work with these students, and some are very good and some are just okay, but they're very expensive. And my goal is to say, if you took all that tuition that you would have spent on that school and created some maybe adjunctive services and supports, would that be a better fit? And we're evaluating all the different pieces of what needs to be there, but you have to get really organized about what you're looking for. And then at the same time, you have to understand that every single year is going to be different. Developmentally, it's going to shift. So it's not about, where are they going to be for the next 4 years? It's like, no, where are they going to be for 1 year that kind of understands them at a decently high level? And then you have to learn how to work with schools. I have a whole podcast episode on what it means to be in a school meeting and how stressful they can be and how it's so hard to get on the same page and work together and understand where everybody's role is. So we're in a lot of school meetings at our practice because it gets pretty contentious at times, and it's just tricky. But it's a process like anything of, can I get the school to understand that there are real developmental factors that impact this child's learning, and what are the way that the school already has available to them that can support them? Because I'm not looking for extra work on the teachers either. I'm not looking to make their jobs miserable. But it's a collaborative process where you have to learn how to build a team, and that's tricky.
Yeah, so tricky. Yes. And I was curious if you have, and if you don't, if it's too individualized, that's fine. But just curious if you have like common strategies you recommend for this population in the classroom. Like a lot of times we create a cheat sheet. I'll create a cheat sheet for my clients so that the strategies the parents are working on at home can be worked on, can be applied in schools. It's very simply, nothing that's overwhelming, but hopefully not. Try not to be. Is there anything like that could be helpful that's kind of generic for most of the clients?
Yeah, it's hard because it is a very individualized process. The one thing that does come to mind, though, is, executive function support is probably useful across the board. And what that looks like is, again, if a child is constantly forgetting to turn things in, the school's common response is, well, they got to figure it out. They got to learn how to do it, which isn't super helpful. Because again, if you're looking at not as a moral failing, but a developmental gap, then you want the school to understand that they need to take more of the onus on of how they support him so that that failure doesn't continue to happen. And so that, again, if they do better, they'll try harder. So you got to help them do better in not letting their grades suffer or being punished for an executive function challenge, and how you advocate for that to a school so that they're understanding that and then putting things in place where there's a lot more accountability, and helping that kid understand that accountability is necessary, because they'll push back, be like, I don't want to do a check-in with the teacher every, morning. I'm like, until you do this on your own, brother, like, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes you got to learn how to accept a little bit of help. That's okay. We all need it. But again, it's how parents go to the school and help them understand that it is developmental in nature. It is not a choice. It is not a failing. It is causing an enormous amount of anxiety or shame or stress. And what are some ways we can be more proactive in meeting that kid where they are?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's the great message. And if they can get into that mindset, they start to see things differently. It's, and it can be less frustrating. It's like, they're not choosing to misbehave or to do these things or not do these things. It's a legitimate area of need. Yeah, for sure. And, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your podcast too. How did you start the podcast? Tell us about it and what it's all about.
Yeah. I kept getting not the same questions from all of these clients and families, but a lot of similar ones where, I was kind of almost going on a script about things I wanted them to understand. And I was like, I think it might be helpful for a lot of parents who have these similar questions to have a podcast where we take a specific question and dive into what it's really about and try to break it down. So, a lot of my podcasts episodes are based on burning questions of this specific thing that I hear a lot. And sometimes I have experts on that are dealing with that issue and can talk about it to a degree. Sometimes I do solo episodes. And what I'm trying to do more of now is more listener guided questions. I want people to submit questions through the website at hopelesslygifted.com so that we can tailor what your needs are. That's the kind of thing that activates me. When a parent comes in to me with something they need, my brain starts working and I start going. And so, I've tried to create this free resource for parents, educators. I've even had parents tell me their kids listen and they're like, hey, this guy gets me. And I'm like, yeah, all right. Like that is the nicest thing I have ever heard. And that rules.
Amazing.
Yeah. Isn't that cool? So I've been very blessed to be doing it about a year now. And it's been great. And I called it Hopelessly Gifted. And everybody's like, that sounds kind of negative. I'm like, it's really not. It's more like, you are who you are. It's hopeless to try to wish you were somebody else. You are exactly who you are. Even if you feel like an alien on this planet, that's okay. And at the same time, a lot of people see giftedness as, oh, you're going to be great. Life's going to be easy. You're so talented. Everything's going to be great for you. And I try to touch base with the parents who are like, this is painful. And I'm worried about my kid and it's feeling hopeless and I don't know how to get the help that I need. And that's who I want to be talking to, because you are not alone. And, it is through the hopelessness, there is a process to finding hope.
Absolutely. Definitely. And I think that I'm so glad you shared that, because I think there are some misconceptions that we didn't really talk about that concept, but there are misconceptions out there when people hear the word gifted. And, and I think that is such an important piece, that it doesn't mean that everything's going to be smooth and easy. So that's so important. Well, if there's one last bit of, kind of hope or share for those that are struggling, out there, families are like, oh, this is tough. It's tricky. I don't know what to do. What would you want to share with them today?
One, never do anything alone. Nobody does anything great alone. And so on some level, it is about finding support from people that understand. And I know a lot of people with parents of neurodivergent kids, their neighbors don't understand, the grandparents don't understand, their friends and family don't understand. And that can be very invalidating and tricky, but there are other people out there who know exactly what you're going through and that you are not alone, and there are ways to deal with this stuff. And then the other thing to remember when you're dealing with kids that are very complicated is, for a lot of kids, the complex is simple and the simple is complex. And you have to remember that. When it doesn't seem to make sense of why they won't do something as simple as brushing their teeth, when they can do something as fantastic as, playing Mozart, that is exactly what it's like for gifted kids, a lot of these gifted kids. And it's okay to remember that so that you know where you can add support and not feel like they're just, shoving you off or, ignoring you.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That is like such a good explanation. And that just even that little phrase, the complex is simple and the simple is complex. I mean, that is really telling and just really hones in on what's going on. And I think, again, that awareness, what you're doing for the parents, is so incredibly helpful to help them feel successful as parents.
I'm happy to do it. And, luckily I grew up. And so I'm a lot more connected with, oh yeah, this doesn't feel good all the time. But, it's, I'm very privileged to be able to do what I'm doing.
Yeah, incredible. Well, let's make sure to share how people can find you, and also your services are remote and in person, right? So people can receive support from your practice both ways.
Absolutely. No, we see people all over the country. I have a few international clients as well. I'm very happy to meet with anybody that I can. And it's all about creating a good fit. And if we're not a good fit for what you need and what what you're looking for, we help you figure out what that is. And so, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to us at our website, www.centerforidentitypotential.com. You could also find the podcast Hopelessly Gifted at hopelesslygifted.com. And you could look at the Apple Podcasts and Spotify to download episodes. But yeah, we're happy to reach out and talk with anybody. And we do things like executive function coaching and, training for schools and consultation, whatever is appropriate for your needs.
Fantastic. And do you take insurance?
So we do not, unfortunately, because our process doesn't fit along the guidelines of what most insurance panels want. And we need to be able to do what works for these kids. So, but we try not to let costs get in the way. We have ways to figure out how we make it always work if we need to. And that's on us to help you figure out.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Mark, this was awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. It was a great conversation. I love everything you're doing. Thank you for all the support you're providing this community. It's having a huge impact. And
thank you so much, Brooke. I really appreciate being on here, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Fantastic. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
You as well. Thank you.
I'm dancing on the edge again. The wind is calling my name. I'm dancing on the edge again. This time I'm not looking back, babe. You can change me, you can tell me down. I'll leave echoes in every place I find. I break the molds with the rebel's mind. I'm a hurricane of free, rolling mine.
The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only. The content shared is based on the experiences, opinions, and perspectives of the hosts and their guests and should not be construed as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. The discussions and topics covered are intended to foster understanding and awareness of autism therapies, but are not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Before making any decisions regarding therapies or treatments, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare provider who can provide personalized recommendations based on your unique circumstances. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree that the hosts, guests, and producers are not responsible for any consequences, damages, or outcomes arising from the use or application of any information during the show.